Hey guys, tonight we're going back, way back, to a time when arguing over the placement of a public fountain could genuinely derail a town council meeting. For weeks. You're standing in the cobbled square of a medieval Italian town. The air smells faintly of wet limestone, firewood, and overcooked beans. You hear the echoing clink of a blacksmith's hammer nearby. And in the middle of it all, a gloriously underwhelming fountain, dripping, crooked, and controversial. You walk past vendors selling slightly wilted produce, and you notice several men in robes gesturing wildly near a stone basin with what appears to be a lion head carved into it. Two of them are shouting. One is weeping. One is chewing parsley like it's a stress toy. You've arrived during the latest round of what historians generously call civic planning, and what locals just refer to as the usual nonsense. You probably won't survive this, not because of the dangers of medieval plumbing, although that's not nothing, but because the politics are so slow, so circular, and so full of obscure Latin references that your soul might actually just nap itself out of existence. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Feel free to post where you're watching from and what time it is. I always love knowing who's joining me around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin in 13th century central Italy. The summers are dry, the winters are wet, and urban water access is a logistical nightmare. Wells aren't always safe, rivers flood too easily, and aqueducts, those marvels of ancient Rome, are now cracked, diverted, or full of frogs. And into this thirsty chaos steps the communal fountain. A public water source, yes, but also a public statement. And more often than not, a public disaster. Imagine living in a city like Perugia, where every neighborhood wants its own elegant fountain, but nobody wants to pay for it. One councilman insists the fountain should go next to the cathedral. Another demands it stand in front of the marketplace. A third suggests the cemetery, for reasons no one fully understands. Debates last so long they require snack breaks and multiple candle refills. One poor scribe is caught recording both sides of the argument, and later accused of bias via ink pressure. But the fight isn't just about where the fountain goes, it's about what it says. A fountain near a church? That's moral superiority. Near the market? That's economic clout. On a hilltop? That's architectural arrogance. And heaven help the town where two factions demand matching fountains on either side of the square. Symmetry in this era is an act of war. A real historical example? In the town of Todi, rival patrician families argued over which square deserved the only functioning public water source. It was eventually installed in a neutral zone, which turned out to be downhill from both sides, leading to decades of subtle complaints that their rival's water smelled slightly faster. Historians still argue whether these debates were sincerely about infrastructure or cleverly disguised power plays. Some letters suggest the fountains were excuses to claim street visibility for family crests. Others hint that stonemasons were bribing councilmen just to keep the commissions coming. You pass through another town, let's say Orvieto, and spot a fountain with only 3 sides. It looks like someone started it and then gave up halfway through. Turns out, the town ran out of funds and patience after the 4th side's proposed statue, A naked Bacchus holding a goat was deemed theologically confusing. The plan was scrapped, the stone left rough, and the goat? The goat was moved to a different project entirely. One particularly strange but well-documented case happened in Lucca, where monks from a local monastery insisted on routing water from their private spring into the town's central fountain, but only on alternating Tuesdays. The townspeople, desperate and dusty, began gathering in droves on those days, forming lines that sometimes led into disputes about piety proximity. Eventually, the monks were overruled, the spring was redirected, and the town celebrated by carving an image of a sulking monk on the fountain's base. It's still there, looking eternally peeved. The process of building these fountains was, naturally, its own catastrophe. First, there were the engineers, many of whom still relied on Roman manuscripts, even though half the diagrams were missing and the measurements were in units no one had used in centuries. Then came the stonemasons, who insisted on artistic freedom. Then the councilmen, who insisted on micromanaging the artists. Cue more debates, cue shouting, cue someone leaving in tears, every single time. A fringe tidbit? Some town records suggest that fountain placement meetings had to be relocated to wine cellars, just to keep everyone calm enough to form complete sentences. These meetings would, by necessity, end with multiple naps. As the section winds down, you stand next to a particularly tired-looking fountain. The water trickles with the softest gurgle, like it's whispering its resignation. Above it, a plaque reads something in Latin. You squint. It roughly translates to, "May this water flow more peacefully than the council ever did." You wake, gently, in the same medieval square, the low splash of water still echoing around worn stone. Your feet carry you down a side alley where a narrow channel of water hugs the wall like a petulant cat. Here, the argument isn't about where the fountain goes, it's about how the water gets there. Because in Italy, even in the Middle Ages, nothing ever dies. Not grudges, not pasta, and certainly not aqueducts. Many of the aqueducts feeding towns in the 13th and 14th centuries weren't new. They were leftovers, sometimes remarkably intact, from Roman times. You trace one with your fingers, the mossy curve of ancient masonry stretching above you like a half-forgotten thought. It's still functioning, kind of. The flow is weak. The water quality? Suspicious at best. But it's water, and that's enough for now. You follow its path across fields and vineyards, where peasants complain that Roman ghosts keep changing the water pressure. You think that's a joke. You're not sure. In places like Assisi, the old aqueducts didn't connect to modern needs. Towns had expanded, hills had shifted, and frankly, the people in charge were more focused on which saint was appearing in which loaf of bread than on hydraulic pressure. So, engineers, if we can generously call them that, got creative. They rerouted, siphoned, and spliced together different segments like they were hosting a community plumbing bake-off. And, because this is Italy, a turf war immediately erupted. In Perugia, two rival groups of engineers allegedly disagreed so violently over how to connect two water sources that one of them stole the other's donkey. The donkey was later returned unharmed, but only after a symbolic duel fought with wooden spoons in front of a very confused bishop. Historians still argue whether that story is apocryphal or just deeply underreported. Back in the city, you find yourself walking beside an elegant, tree-shaded canal known as a riga. These man-made channels meander quietly through neighborhoods and vineyards, feeding into modest stone basins. At first glance, it's peaceful. But when the flow slows in summer, everything changes. Suddenly, one neighborhood accuses the next of sabotaging the inlet. There's a rumor that someone dropped bread dough into the upstream valve as revenge for a poorly attended wedding. A real historical conflict? In 1320s Siena, the council allocated aqueduct water based on population, but only counted heads of household, ignoring women, children, and domestic servants. One artisan district petitioned to be counted by the volume of personal sweating, arguing that their forge-heavy trade meant more water needs. The petition was denied. A protest followed. It involved 4 donkeys, 3 bagpipes, and a satirical puppet show that is now, tragically, lost to history. As you climb uphill, the water channels start to falter. The city expands beyond the limits of Roman plumbing. Residents at the top, wealthier and politically connected, demand better flow, so valves are closed downhill. Suddenly, a poor baker is left without enough water to knead his dough. Cue another complaint, this time in rhyme, pinned to the town notice board with a fishbone. Your hands trail along another aqueduct wall, this one patched with bricks of 3 different centuries. Someone has carved a face into one of the keystones, a winking man with a long nose. Local legend says it's the likeness of an engineer who convinced the town to reroute a failing pipe through his family vineyard. The grapes, apparently, were excellent that year. The ethics? Dubious. A fringe tidbit. In some cities, the aqueduct was technically a holy structure, since it passed near or through church land. That meant repairs had to be blessed, yes, blessed, before workers could dig. This occasionally led to situations where a leaking pipe flooded a street for weeks, while everyone waited for the bishop to return from a pilgrimage to procure the correct blessing oil. Meanwhile, ducks moved in. And this wasn't just rural superstition. In Bologna, a council report from 1309 includes an official complaint about unauthorized aquatic heresies. Translation? A plumber tried to fix something without a priest's approval. Heresy via wrench. You finally arrive at a clearing where 2 aqueduct arms meet, or rather, should meet. One stone channel ends 2 feet short of the other, like 2 lovers reaching across a gap but refusing to step forward. A group of men is debating loudly. One holds a scroll. One is drawing diagrams in the dust. A third is yelling at a goat. Turns out they mismeasured, or miscalculated, or misread the original Roman plans. Either way, there's a 2-foot gap, and nobody has a plan for what to do next. The town has already held 2 feasts to celebrate the completion of the aqueduct, so announcing the mistake is politically impossible. You step quietly past as one man begins suggesting an invisible bridge theory. Everyone else groans. As dusk settles, you return to the town square. You notice the fountain has slowed. A single stream of water trickles out of the lion's mouth. It arcs briefly, then dribbles down the wrong side of the basin. Someone has placed a bucket underneath, probably to collect the splash and sell it to pilgrims as blessed runoff. You sit. Listen. Somewhere, uphill, someone is yelling again about flow direction, but you're too tired to care. The water, for now, still moves. You rise early the next morning, or whatever counts as morning in a medieval city where church bells and roosters argue over who gets to define time. The cobblestones under your feet are still damp from last night's trickling failures. You walk with quiet purpose to Florence, where the problem isn't the aqueducts or even the water itself. No, here, the problem is style. Florence prides itself on being the beating heart of art, intellect, and wildly impractical design decisions. The year is somewhere around the late 1200s, and you arrive just in time for an argument about a lion's head. Not a real one, though that might have been simpler, but a carved lion spout meant to grace a new public fountain in Piazza della Signoria. The city council has been fighting over this one spout for months, maybe years. The lion's mouth is supposed to pour water into a modest basin. Simple, right? Wrong. One faction insists the lion must look fierce to embody Florence's strength. Another demands a noble expression, stoic, contemplative, more Aquinas, less actual lion. The sculptor, caught in the middle, offers a sleepy lion. Everyone hates it. Historians still debate whether the sculptor intentionally botched the face to get out of the commission. One diary notes he was suspiciously enthusiastic about leaving town afterward. Meanwhile, drafts and redrafts of the lion's face clog the council archives. There are dozens of versions: snarling lion, laughing lion, yawning lion, lion wearing a scroll. One is inexplicably a duck. A mason's apprentice claims that sketch was a prank. No one believes him. You lean against a column and overhear a heated conversation between two Florentine officials. One is quoting Virgil to justify a wide basin. The other responds with Cicero, defending a deeper trough. The only thing they agree on? That whoever suggested using marble from Pisa should be excommunicated. This is Florence, after all. You don't import dignity. You chisel it from your own hills. As you move through the plaza, artisans line the edges with tools and half-carved blocks. Every stonemason, sculptor, and fresco dabbler wants a piece of this fountain. It's a public commission. That means glory, visibility, maybe even a papal nod if the water sparkles just right. But like everything else, the project has stalled. One week, it's the lion. The next, it's the question of inscriptions. Should the fountain bear the Latin motto of the Republic? Or something more universal, like "Drink and be civil"? Someone suggests a passage from the Psalms. A bishop agrees, but only if he can personally pick the font. You pause beside the work site, now wrapped in scaffolding that's mostly decorative. The original plans called for a simple two-tiered fountain. Then someone added a third tier. Then cherubs. Then two dolphins, because Genoa had dolphins, and Florence needed to compete. Somewhere along the way, the water pressure calculations were lost. A fringe detail buried in city records mentions a baker who complained the unfinished fountain blocked sunlight from his window. His petition was ignored, until he started handing out stale bread to every councilman who passed. Mysteriously, the project was reoriented 3 degrees to the left the following week. But the best part? The basin itself. A huge, scalloped affair meant to symbolize unity. Unfortunately, the masons working on it came from rival guilds. Mid-construction, someone chiseled an extra groove on one side. Just a little curve, barely noticeable, but deeply offensive to the other team. The groove remains. The gills do not speak. You step back to take in the whole fountain, or what's finished of it. Pigeons are nesting in the top tier. A small boy is splashing in a corner puddle. A woman with a bucket mutters about art ruining water. Historians still argue whether Florence's obsession with aesthetic perfection delayed crucial infrastructure. One camp says the beauty inspired civic pride and long-term vision. The other calls it chronic sculpture-based procrastination. You sip from a side spout. It tastes faintly of chalk and pride. And just when you think the worst is over, you notice a notice. Nailed to a post beside the fountain, it reads, "Public hearing, concerning the direction of the water flow. Tuesday after Vespers. Bring diagrams." Because apparently, now the argument is about which way the water should flow, clockwise around the basin, or counterclockwise, like the celestial spheres. You can't make this up. Except someone did, in exquisite calligraphy. Evening approaches. The fountain, despite its years-long journey, isn't quite done. The lion head is still missing. The dolphin spouts remain dry, and the basin collects more leaves than water. Still, people gather around. Lovers sit at the edge. Children lean over it to drop in acorns and make wishes. An elderly man spits into it every morning for luck. As the last light touches the marble, and yes, it's Florentine marble, thank you very much, you understand something. The fountain isn't just about water. It's about visibility, legacy, control. A community putting itself on display, one mossy stone at a time. You sit, let the cool air settle around you, and listen to the gentle trickle of one working spout. It burbles quietly. One of the dolphins winks. Probably. You leave Florence under a sky the color of old parchment and head south to Siena, where the hills ripple like a spilled carpet, and every neighborhood considers itself morally superior to the next. Here, your steps lead you not to a single fountain, but to four, spaced awkwardly close together like siblings who refuse to share a bedroom. You quickly learn that in Siena, civic pride isn't just a warm feeling, it's a blood sport. Each district, or contrada, sees itself as distinct. They have their own flags, their own songs, their own saints, and yes, their own preferred fountain designs. The city council once floated the idea of a unifying communal fountain. It was laughed out of the chamber in under 3 minutes. Someone allegedly fainted. Another bit a feather quill in half. And so, you find yourself in the middle of what historians now refer to as the fountain face-off, an unspoken competition of waterworks, stonework, and subtle municipal flexing. The first fountain you encounter is in the Contrada della Lupa, the she-wolf. It's an aggressive slab of stone with blocky Roman lettering and a wolf statue that honestly looks like it might bite you. The water pressure is impressive, though. As you lean in, it splashes your tunic, as if to say, respect. You wander on. Over in Contrada dell'Onda, the wave, the fountain is a completely different vibe. Rounded edges, gentle curves, and a mosaic of fish swimming along the rim. The water here is softer, almost whispering. Someone's added lavender to the basin. It smells like anxiety and passive aggression. Just when you think you've seen it all, you stumble into Contrada del Nicchio, the seashell. Their fountain is Baroque before Baroque even exists, spirals upon spirals, with an actual marble shell pouring water into a smaller shell and so on until your brain gives up. It's beautiful. It's excessive. It's probably cursed. You're not alone in noticing these differences. In the archives of Siena, a letter survives from 1324, in which a visiting Florentine merchant writes, "Their fountains argue louder than their people," which is saying something. The whole thing came to a head during a summer drought. Each district accused the others of splash greed, a term which, while ridiculous, was scrawled earnestly across official complaint scrolls. Rumors swirled that one contrada had secretly diverted water from another. A council inquiry was launched. It lasted 41 days and produced 2 fistfights, a love affair, and exactly 0 resolutions. Historians still argue whether the inquiry was genuine or just an excuse for free lunches and gossip. Meanwhile, a mason from the Onda district began publicly offering fountain readings, claiming the ripples in each district's basin foretold their political futures. He made a fortune. Eventually, the church stepped in. The readings were banned, the mason excommunicated, and then, naturally, rehired as an aesthetic consultant. But perhaps the strangest tale comes from Contrada della Torre, the tower. Frustrated by the rising prestige of the Seashell district's spiraling masterpiece, they decided to build a fountain of pure symbolism. A minimalist stone cube with water emerging from an unseen hole underneath. "It's about the idea of water," their spokesman explained. It was widely hated. A group of children filled it with turnips. A fringe tidbit? One ambitious councilman once proposed connecting all the fountains via underground pipes so water could circulate and promote unity. He was booed so loudly that pigeons fled the rooftops. You settle on a bench between 2 rival fountains. On one side, a basin with tiny sculpted griffins and polished marble benches. On the other, a moss-covered trough with a quote in Latin that translates to, "You can't drink dignity." Subtle. As twilight brushes the city in soft gold, you watch citizens pass by each fountain like religious devotees. One woman dips her hand into the she-wolf's water, kisses her fingertips, and walks away. A boy throws a coin into the wave's basin and mutters a wish. An old man near the tower cube just spits again, apparently a recurring theme in your journey. And yet, for all the arguing, all the aesthetic one-upmanship, Siena's fountains work, more or less. The water flows, people gather, and despite their differences, the citizens share this odd, hydrological heartbeat. Even during the Paleo, the city's chaotic horse race, locals will sneak out in the early hours to clean and polish their district's fountain. Not out of necessity, but out of pride. It's a silent competition that never ends, because no one ever really wins. You close your eyes for a moment and listen. The sound of 4 competing fountains swirls in your ears, roaring, trickling, gurgling, hissing. Each one vying for your attention like children begging to show you their drawing of the same cat. You sigh and smile and keep walking. By the time you reach Rome, you're feeling hydrated, perhaps emotionally oversaturated by decorative basins. But Rome is different. Bigger, louder, more layered, and somehow smellier. You trudge through narrow streets that tangle like a dropped bowl of spaghetti, where every corner has a statue, and every statue thinks it deserves a fountain. And yet, not all water in Rome is created equal. In fact, if you follow the flow carefully, you'll find a quiet war simmering beneath the cobblestones, the Pope's water versus the people's mud. Here's the scene. Rome still uses some ancient Roman aqueducts, because why not? They're already there, and most of them still work better than modern infrastructure in Naples. But while these majestic systems can channel water across miles with graceful arches and gravity-fed logic, what actually happens once it arrives? That depends entirely on who you are. The Pope gets the sparkling stuff, carefully filtered, diverted into Baroque fountains carved by artists who charge more for nostrils than you make in a year. The people? Well, they get what's left, usually in side alleys, sometimes through pipes that appear to be made of leftover bell metal and prayer. You stand before one such holy fountain, decorated with angels and an extremely jacked John the Baptist. It sparkles in the midday sun. A cardinal walks by, dips his ringed finger in the basin, and flicks water into the air as if blessing the pigeons. A few noble women admire the reflection of their veils in its glassy surface. Then, you follow a crumbling side street into Trastevere. There, behind a half-leaning tower, sits another fountain, less like a masterpiece, more like a suggestion. It dribbles into a trough so green you wonder if it's meant to grow something. A young boy lowers a clay jug into it carefully, avoiding a floating beetle. A woman washes cabbage leaves on the rim. An old man sips, swishes, and mutters, "Tastes like papal leftovers." Historians still argue whether this imbalance was bureaucratic oversight or fully intentional. Some claim the Church reserved clean water as a symbol of purity and divine order. Others say, well, the cardinals just really liked their fountains photogenic. A particularly snarky chronicler from the 14th century, name redacted, possibly for his own safety, once wrote, "The bishop's lions spit wine, the people's oxen cough dust." It was copied into at least 7 manuscripts, then mysteriously stopped appearing. You wander to the Piazza della Rotonda, where the famous fountain in front of the Pantheon stands like a smug marble peacock. Designed by Giacomo della Porta, it's full of grandeur. Dolphins, grotesques, towering obelisks, and a water pressure that rivals modern-day hotel showers. But even this marvel has a story. When first installed, locals complained that the roaring jets made it impossible to hold conversations. A committee was formed. The solution? Talk louder. A fringe tidbit. According to one dusty ledger, a group of students once dammed a papal fountain at night and redirected its flow toward a brothel, in the name of hydraulic equality. The flow was reversed by dawn, but the brothel had the cleanest windows in Trastevere for months. You pass another square, Campo dei Fiori, and spot a fountain once considered the people's triumph. It featured no saints, no lions, no cryptic Latin, just a wide basin and plain stone spout. Simple, efficient, beloved. Until someone graffitied the side with a caricature of the Pope riding a donkey. The fountain was quietly dismantled within the week. The donkey, however, lives on in ballads. Even during festivals, the water disparity is obvious. On feast days, fountains near the Vatican are decorated with garlands and lavender, their waters flowing more freely than usual, as if even gravity gets wholly on command. Meanwhile, in the outer districts, locals throw coins into their sluggish fountains and wish for rainfall. You settle on a shaded bench beside one such humble spout. The water here is tepid but honest. A small dog drinks beside you. Someone's carved a face into the side of the basin. Crooked smile, missing nose. It looks suspiciously like the mayor. You wonder how much water Rome wastes on display. But then again, maybe that's the point. Fountains here aren't just plumbing. They're theater. Hierarchy in stone and splash. Every droplet tells you who matters and who mildly matters less. And yet, despite the imbalance, the city moves. People still gather by the humble fountains. They chat, they gossip, they fill jugs and roll their eyes together. The water may not be divine, but it's familiar. As twilight sets in, a group of children chase each other around a cracked stone basin. A young couple sits beside a choked-off pipe, their hands close but not touching. An old woman fills a tin cup, drinks, and nods, satisfied at least for today. You leave behind Rome's swirling hierarchy of sacred spray and head northeast, over hills dotted with olive trees, past vineyards suspiciously guarded by geese, until your feet reach a place that doesn't just sit on water, it floats on it. Venice. The moment you arrive, you understand something unspoken. This is a city that looks like it should never have worked, and frankly, still might collapse out of spite. But while tourists will one day flock here to get lost in its watery beauty, you're here to witness something far more fragile than the canals. Venetians trying to build public fountains, which, in a city with no natural fresh water, is exactly as dramatic as it sounds. You're standing in a campo, Venetian for square, though it often feels more like a misnamed puddle, and in the center is a vera da pozzo, a wellhead. But it's not really a fountain. These elegant stone cylinders are covers for rainwater cisterns, built underneath the square itself, sealed with layers of sand and clay, designed to catch and filter rainfall for public use. You lean over one. It's quiet, capped with an iron grate shaped like a saint's tear. You're told this cistern was built in 1332 after a scandal involving a nobleman who tried to bottle and sell canal water as purified by proximity to gondolas. Historians still debate whether the nobleman was jailed or just promoted sideways. But the key problem here? Rain doesn't fall when you want it to. And Venetians are nothing if not theatrical. So every public wellhead or fountain becomes a performance. The construction? Elaborate. The dedication ceremony? Lengthy. The sabotage? Frequent. You walk past the Basilica di San Marco and hear shouting. A crowd has gathered around a new fountain, a gift from a visiting ambassador. It features 3 dolphins, 2 mermaids, and 1 baby angel playing the lute poorly. The crowd isn't impressed. They're whispering that it looks too Genoese, which here is practically slander. Within a week, the lute breaks off. Suspiciously. The fountain springs a leak, also suspiciously. A month later, it's removed for maintenance and never seen again. Venice, you realize, doesn't just want water. It wants narrative. Another time, a modest marble spout is unveiled in Dorso Duro. The local guild hails it as a miracle. A poet composes a sonnet. The city celebrates with masks, dancing, and a theatrical reenactment of the spout's first drop, played by a child in a papier-mâché water costume. You think this is satire. It is not. Then come the leaks. Oh, the leaks. Because water must be stored underground in cisterns, any crack in the system invites disaster. Salty canal water seeps in. Molds grow. Fish sometimes appear. You approach one such failed fountain in Cannaregio. A sign reads, "Closed for purification." A local whispers, "It smelled like cooked shrimp for days." A fringe tidbit? There's a surviving 14th century pamphlet. Yes, Venice had pamphlets that documents a woman who claimed to have seen the Virgin Mary in the reflection of a well. People queued for days. The city declared the fountain holy. 3 weeks later, it turned out to be just the angle of a nearby chimney. The woman was fined for vision without license. And yet, despite the absurdity, the system works. Barely. Rainwater is caught, filtered, and distributed. The city builds covered walkways to shepherd water where it's needed. Even the wealthiest families must use public wells from time to time. There's an unspoken code. Don't hoard, don't splash, and never, ever pretend to drink from the canal. You settle by one of the more famous wellheads, the Pozzo dei Miracoli, rumored to have cured a bishop's cat of mysterious laziness. It's probably not true, but there's a small flower left on its rim, and someone has carved a tiny fish into the side. It feels sacred, or at least respected. Venice's relationship with water is layered. It floats above it, depends on it, fears it, and disguises it beautifully. Fountains here aren't central. They're discreet, precious, half-hidden, like secrets in a city that trades in mystery. And while other towns bickered over lions and cherubs, Venice worried about salt content, barrel lining, and the proper incense to bless a rain spout. You pass a small courtyard where a wellhead is being cleaned by 2 elderly women. They scrub gently, mutter about clouds coming in, and wave to a child carrying a wooden bucket. This, you think, is as Venetian as it gets. Ritual, practicality, and gossip, all filtered through limestone. As you wander off, a bell rings in the distance. Water from a rooftop gutter splashes into a hidden cistern. Somewhere below your feet, the city quietly drinks. You wake to the sound of hoofbeats and shouting. Somewhere nearby, a goat is either being herded or leading a rebellion. You've arrived in a bustling hilltop town, unnamed, sun-baked, probably Tuscan, and today's drama? A broken pipe and a goat with boundary issues. The fountain at the center of town was once a proud achievement, sponsored by the local Guild of Carpenters, designed by an out-of-work sculptor, and built over 3 suspiciously frantic weeks. At its peak, it featured flowing water from a carved hammer, 2 ornamental chisels, and a basin shaped like a wooden mallet, except in stone, of course, because irony. Then the pipe cracked. Then the goat got involved. The townspeople whisper that the goat belonged to a rival guild, the stonemasons, perhaps, or the farriers. No one agrees. What they do agree on is that the goat escaped, clambered up the scaffolding during the final blessing ceremony, and promptly fell into the main pipe, dislodging the valve. The fountain gurgled once and died. Cue chaos. A 3-month inquest followed. The pipe had clearly been weakened prior to the goat incident. Was it sabotage? Was it negligence? Was it divine judgment? Historians still argue whether the goat was a scapegoat, literally, or just a clumsy four-legged anarchist. Meanwhile, the guilds turned on each other. The carpenters blamed the masons. The masons blamed the metal workers. The metal workers blamed the weather. And the local cheese vendor blamed everyone for distracting from his new line of garlic-aged pecorino. You're shown an official parchment from the town archives, an exquisitely calligraphed complaint from the Carpentry Guild. It includes a diagram of the goat's trajectory, multiple footnotes about proper fastening protocols, and a hand-drawn image of a smug-looking goat that may or may not be based on a real animal. You laugh softly, and the town elder shakes his head. "This was no joke," he mutters. "That fountain was supposed to open the trade fair." He gestures toward the now dry basin. Moss is growing where water should have flowed. One chisel statue is cracked. The hammer spout has been repurposed as a perch for a cat who looks like he knows too much. A fringe tidbit buried in the town ledger suggests that, during the inquest, the goat was held under house arrest in a grain shed and fed oats soaked in holy water. The bishop allegedly called this excessively symbolic. Eventually, a new pipe was ordered from Florence, but it arrived bent. Repair was delayed, tempers frayed. The town held a festival anyway, renaming it the Festival of the Fallen Goat. It's still celebrated today, with parades, mildly threatening goat-shaped bread loaves, and a reenactment involving an actor in a fur suit and a hollow fountain replica. You sit beside the broken fountain. Someone's left flowers near the base, a quiet memorial, or maybe just a joke. Two children toss pebbles into the dry basin and pretend it still flows. They giggle when a pebble bounces off the stone hammer with a hollow clonk. The thing is, the fountain still looks good. The stonework is solid. The basin catches sunlight beautifully. The design, though clearly symbolic of carpentry to a comedic degree, was ahead of its time. It could be fixed. But no one wants to bring it up. Not because of cost. Not because of difficulty. Because reopening the topic would mean reopening the blame. You wander into the town hall where the inquest papers still sit in a glass case. One document is titled Memorandum on Livestock Intrusion in Hydrological Infrastructure. Another features 16 witness statements, all different, all very sure. The goat, for its part, reportedly lived a long life and was buried with modest honors outside town. A small headstone reads, "He leapt, we fell." You sip from your water skin, which tastes vaguely of rosemary, and think about how something as simple as a cracked pipe could unravel so much civic order. Historians, being historians, later cited this event as a case study in guild-based urban fragility. It's now taught in obscure university courses, usually right before lunch. As the sun begins to set, you notice something odd. A small trickle of water running beneath the fountain. A pipe has cracked again. Not dramatically, just a hairline leak. It bubbles up quietly, unnoticed, except by the same cat, who lifts his paw and watches the ripples like they hold secrets. You think about how infrastructure is rarely about materials or labor. It's about people, and goats, and the fragile web between intention and outcome. You lean against the warm stone of the fountain. Let your eyes close and listen. To the wind through old scaffolding. To the faint gurgle of misaligned plumbing. To a story that still flows, even if the water doesn't. You rise before dawn the next day, slipping out of goat-haunted Tuscany and into the rugged folds of Umbria, where the hills are steeper, the towns smaller, and the fountains, well, a bit more agricultural. In this village, more of a stone knot than a town, really, the fountain isn't carved by master artisans or blessed by bishops. It's a trough, plain, squat, with a wooden ladle on a chain and a smell that oscillates between mint and sheep. This, you quickly learn, is a multi-purpose fountain designed to quench every thirst, clean every boot, and maybe cool a few cheeses in high summer. It's democracy in liquid form. But don't be fooled by its simplicity. In this sleepy hamlet, this one humble fountain has hosted more arguments than the village priest has hosted sermons. Because when you only have one water source for drinking, laundry, animals, foot washing, gossiping, baptisms, and mysterious herbal rinses, timing becomes everything. You sit nearby, watching a shepherd wait, somewhat impatiently, as a washerwoman rinses a large sheet that, from the looks of it, has already seen several revolutions and one minor saint's miracle. The shepherd sighs. The washerwoman pretends not to hear. You feel the tension brewing like oversteeped tea. And here it comes, the schedule debate. See, this town once tried to institute an official water schedule. Mornings for laundry, afternoons for livestock, evenings for human drinking only. Simple enough. Until someone's goat got heat stroke at noon. Until someone's underpants ended up in a soup pot. Until someone's child drank from the ladle after it had been used to rinse a frog. Historians still argue whether the frog ladle incident was real or just town legend designed to scare kids into obedience. The schedule fell apart, replaced by what locals call the moral rotation, an unwritten code of polite yielding, passive-aggressive glances, and an elaborate pecking order involving age, occupation, and your standing with the baker's wife. You hear a story, half-whispered, about a traveler who dared to wash his horse's hooves at the fountain during bread hour. His boots were found full of wet flour the next morning. One councilman, bless his optimistic soul, once suggested building a second fountain. To separate mud from mouths, he said. The town divided instantly, not over cost or labor, but over location. If the second fountain was placed uphill, it implied superiority. Downhill meant contamination. Equal height implied equality, deeply offensive to at least 3 local families. A fringe tidbit from the archives. During the dispute, someone built a tiny unauthorized personal fountain in their backyard by siphoning water off the main pipe. It worked for 3 days before the bucket mysteriously filled with pickled turnips. No one took responsibility. A poem mocking the event circulated for months. Eventually, all fountain expansion plans were shelved under the newly established guideline. Let the water flow where it will, but not too quickly, and never on market day. You glance down at the basin. It's surprisingly elegant when the light hits it just right. The stone has been worn smooth by generations of hands, buckets, ladles, and hooves. There's a small etching on one side, probably added by a bored child or a poetic mason. It says, "Everyone drinks, some apologize." This is a town that doesn't have time for lions or cherubs. It needs function, consistency, and above all, memory. The stone holds it all, the way grief lingers on the rim after a funeral, or the way laughter echoes when wine is splashed from a newly filled jug. Even now, a group of young boys gather around the fountain, daring each other to sip with their eyes closed. An old woman taps her cane against the stone in a slow rhythm, as if listening for a story. A dog naps beside the trough. No one seems to notice the donkey who just drank from the same spot someone bathed their foot. You do. You don't say anything. Instead, you dip your fingers into the water. It's cool and clean enough. Better than expected, really. You watch a beetle paddle across the surface, undisturbed by history. This kind of fountain never makes it into frescoes or manuscripts. It's not draped in marble. It doesn't spout from mythical creatures or erupt in grand ceremonies. But it matters, perhaps more than all the others, because it's used every day, every season, by everyone. As dusk creeps in, someone lights a lantern near the fountain, not to illuminate it, but just to keep company. The soft orange glow reflects off the water, and for a brief moment, the basin looks like gold. You breathe deep and exhale even deeper. The next leg of your journey takes you to a town wrapped in fog, its stone walls damp with memory and the kind of moisture that ruins manuscripts. This is not a place tourists flock to, at least not until the 1800s, when romantic painters rediscover it and declare it gorgeously melancholic. But you're here for something older, quieter, and far more contentious. A fountain no one remembers building, but everyone insists belongs to them. You arrive just as a town meeting is breaking up. You hear phrases like communal heritage, ancestral stewardship, and clearly our side of the square. They're arguing about the fountain at the center of town, a weathered structure that leans slightly to one side, like it once sighed and never fully recovered. The fountain itself is modest, a single tier. No angels, no dolphins, not even a lion head. Just a spout shaped like a leaf, possibly grapevine, possibly fig, depending on which side of the argument you ask. It's been here, supposedly, since the late 1200s, but there's no plaque, no surviving blueprint, no donated by inscription. Only stone, and water, and collective indignation. The issue? The town straddles two administrative districts, divided by a road that runs straight through the plaza like a knife. Each district swears the fountain falls on their half, which would be merely symbolic, if it weren't for funding, and control, and, most crucially, whose festivals get to decorate it. Historians still argue whether the fountain was a joint venture, an accidental construction overlap, or the result of a rogue monk who liked symmetry and didn't care about paperwork. You lean against the fountain's base, watching as two older men from opposite ends of town argue about whose grandfather cleaned it first. Their voices echo off the stone in that theatrical way only small-town disputes can manage. A third man joins in to suggest that his uncle planted the tree that now shades the fountain. It turns out the tree is also disputed. A young boy sits on the edge of the basin and reads a book. You glance at the title. It's The Life of Saint Apollonia, and he's underlined the word toothache for reasons you don't want to ask about. You spot a document pinned to a notice board nearby, an open letter from the mayor titled, "Toward a Unified Fountain Future." It's covered in scribbled rebuttals, including one that just says, "LOL no," in red ink. A fringe tidbit? Local legend claims the fountain sprang up overnight, built by a ghost mason seeking forgiveness. Every generation adds to the myth. A saint visited it. A demon fled from it. A dog once gave birth beside it during a solar eclipse. None of it's verifiable. All of it is believed. You overhear someone say, "The fountain is ours. We bleed on that side." You're not sure if they mean figuratively or just referencing the town's robust history of livestock-based accidents. At one point, an actual measuring tape appears. A man in a wide-brimmed hat tries to determine the fountain's placement down to the centimeter. Tension builds. Someone coughs ominously. A chicken clucks threateningly nearby. Eventually, the man gives up. "It's exactly in the middle," he mutters. Everyone looks at each other. A long silence. Then someone says, "Yes, but which half of the middle?" You retreat to the fountain's far side, where a small brass cup hangs from a hook. Locals say you can tell which district last cleaned the fountain by how polished the cup is. Today it's moderately shiny. A diplomatic effort, maybe. You take a sip. The water tastes like stone and time. Not good, not bad, just inevitable. As dusk settles in, candles appear on both sides of the square. Each group begins preparing their own quiet ritual. A prayer here, a song there, a slice of focaccia passed hand to hand with suspicious generosity. You watch from the fountain's edge, feeling the crackle of tension beneath the peace. And yet, no one harms the fountain. No one dares dirty it, or block it, or throw things into it. They argue about it. They write passive-aggressive poetry about it. But the fountain remains untouched. Revered, even. It is, begrudgingly, the town's shared heartbeat. You lie back against its cool stone base and look up at the cloudy sky. The stars are hiding tonight. But the fountain trickles on. Impartial, indifferent, perhaps a little smug. And you realize something strange. Maybe they like arguing about it. Maybe the fountain doesn't just divide the town. Maybe it connects it. You wake up to the sound of hammering. Not warlike hammering, more the resigned, rhythmic kind that suggests someone's been trying to fix the same leak for 7 years. Welcome to Bologna, home of universities, meat sauces, and one of Italy's most bureaucratically entangled fountains. The fountain in question stands in a shady square not far from the old city walls. It's grand, tall, elaborate, framed by columns and Latin inscriptions that all seem vaguely disappointed in you. In the center is a statue of a scholar holding a book, a quill, and a very passive-aggressive expression. Water drips from scrolls, trickles from lion feet, and sprays, at irregular intervals, from a pigeon-damaged cherub. This is the university fountain, commissioned sometime in the late 13th century to honor Bologna's status as one of Europe's intellectual beacons. A place where law was studied, ideas debated, and extremely long Latin sentences were both spoken and carved into stone with no punctuation in sight. You take a seat on a nearby bench. Next to you, a student, robes slightly wrinkled, eyes exhausted, rehearses an argument about Aquinas versus Averroes. He gestures to the fountain like it might take sides. It doesn't. This fountain, you learn, has long been a site for public oration. Back when lectures were held in open air, scholars would gather around it to test arguments, read poetry, or dramatically insult each other using metaphors involving wine, goats, and celestial bodies. Historians still debate whether any of those debates ever ended in agreement, or whether it was simply a competition to see who could use the word transubstantial the most. But over time, the fountain became more than just a stage. It became a symbol, and as with all symbols, bureaucracy couldn't resist. You find an old leather-bound register at the city archive. Inside, the official guidelines for fountain use in academic contexts, dated 1342. Rules include: no thesis defense shall exceed 45 minutes unless accompanied by snacks. No direct citations while washing garments. All metaphors involving water must be novel and not derivative of previous philosophers' analogies. And the best one: should a pigeon interrupt a speech, the pigeon is to be considered a participant. Then came the reforms. New city leaders wanted to modernize the fountain, streamline its sculpture, simplify the flow, reduce maintenance costs. A committee was formed. It produced 11 contradictory reports. One of them suggested replacing the statues with a single bronze cube to reflect intellectual clarity. That committee was booed. In Latin. A fringe tidbit? In 1367, a prankster student sculpted a second cherub with a book of erotic poetry and managed to swap it into the fountain overnight. It went unnoticed for 3 weeks, during which time, inexplicably, attendance at lectures on Plato tripled. Eventually, the university insisted on managing the fountain itself. The city council objected. A legal battle ensued, documented in nearly 600 pages of correspondences, all handwritten, all signed by people with the same name, Giovanni. To this day, the fountain technically belongs to both the university and the city. This means repairs are delayed, cleaning is inconsistent, and statues are only dusted during exam season. You watch a janitor cautiously scrub algae from a lion's paw, while 3 pigeons observe judgmentally from the scholar's hat. Despite the chaos, students still gather here. A group is huddled in a corner, reciting lines from Dante and giggling every time someone mispronounces Beatrice. Another student is sketching the fountain in a notebook, with a mix of reverence and frustration. "I've drawn this 12 times, she mutters. It's still smug. Water drips, then stops, then drips again. The cherub sputters, hiccups, and then releases a spray directly into the hat of an unsuspecting passerby. A collective oof echoes across the square. The man bows. The fountain wins again. You glance around. Someone has placed a candle near the base. It's not lit. It doesn't need to be. It's a tribute. A silent thank you. Or maybe a quiet bribe for good luck in tomorrow's rhetoric exam. And somehow, through it all, the fountain functions. Not just as plumbing, but as a gathering point, a monument, a punchline, a shrine. It wears its contradictions like ivy, unkempt, stubborn, thriving. You lie back on the bench and listen to the bubbling water, the whispered Latin, the steady chirp of academic suffering. The fountain drips like a ticking clock, marking time, testing patience, and occasionally soaking socks. You think if knowledge had a sound, this might be it. You leave Bologna's academic cacophony behind and head into the wide, hazy plains of the north, where cities sprawl and river fog rolls in like an old man's sigh. You're in Lombardy now, where industry hums faintly in the background, But you're here for something older, quieter. A fountain that doesn't glitter or spout or perform. In this sleepy riverside town, you find what locals call La Fontana del Silencio, the Fountain of Silence. It doesn't look like much. A low stone ring, a single spout tucked into a corner of the square where vines creep up walls and time forgets to pass. The fountain's water barely moves, just a slow, steady trickle that seems designed not to wake the neighbors. You kneel by it. No carvings, no inscriptions, just smooth, weathered stone and a mossy basin that reflects the sky like a forgotten mirror. A small wooden sign nearby reads, "Please do not shout here. The fountain remembers." And people respect that. You watch townsfolk pass with a nod or a whisper. No one lingers long. They fill a jug, rinse an apple, maybe pause for a breath, and move on. There are no sermons here, no parades, no goats in disguise. Just the water, just the sound. Local lore says the fountain dates back to the late 1200s, built quietly by monks who preferred plumbing to preaching. They designed it with acoustics in mind, placing it where walls absorb sound, wind is muffled by hedges, and footsteps fade like dreams. Historians still argue whether the fountain was ever meant for public use at all, or if it was a private monastic tool that simply outlived its owners. A fringe theory even suggests it was part of a failed experiment to measure divine patience by recording how many people spoke while drawing water. The records, if they existed, are long gone. You find a bench nearby, the kind that's more lichen than wood, and let yourself drift into the rhythm of the square. Every few minutes, someone approaches the fountain. No one speaks, and somehow everyone leaves lighter. There's an old man in a wide-brimmed hat who always arrives at noon. He touches the stone with both hands before cupping water to his lips. He once told a passing merchant, "I come here when the world gets too loud," then said nothing else for the next 15 years. Children, usually agents of chaos, go quiet near the fountain. Not from scolding, just naturally. A little girl skips toward it, stops, looks at her mother, and whispers, "It's listening." Maybe it is. You lean in and listen too, and if you concentrate, you can almost hear it. The sounds buried in the stone, arguments long forgotten, secret confessions, songs sung under breath, tears that never touched the ground. There's a chipped mark near the base of the fountain. Locals say it came from a duel. Two lovers, one farewell, one poorly aimed dagger. Whether it's true doesn't matter. The story is told in whispers anyway, as if the stone might blush if overheard. You watch as dusk paints the square in shades of lavender and rust. A breeze moves through the ivy. The sound of the fountain, soft, persistent, unbothered, fills the quiet without ever breaking it. A tiny plaque, barely legible, rests in the grass beside the fountain. It reads, "To the things we carry but never say, leave them here." You wonder how many people have done exactly that. How many burdens have been poured out in sips and silent tears. How many arguments were paused, rerouted, or forgotten because this fountain whispered louder than anger. There are no decorations here, no cherubs, no saints, just water and stone, and the unspoken agreement that this place isn't for spectacle. It's for stillness. You rest your head against the fountain's rim and close your eyes. The stone is cool. The water hums softly, like a lullaby without melody. And for the first time in a long while, your thoughts stop chattering. You don't plan. You don't compare. You don't need to explain anything. You just listen. And so, your journey brings you, slowly, sleepily, with feet dusted in centuries, to your final stop. A hilltop town where the wind smells faintly of rosemary and old arguments. It's sunset now, and in this last square, quiet but not lonely, you find perhaps the most ironic fountain of them all. A fountain built out of spite. It's small, a bit crooked, clearly not made by a master sculptor. In fact, it looks like someone tried to copy a fancy Florentine design from memory and got distracted halfway through by a loud rooster or a tax dispute. But the water flows. Here's what happened, as the local version goes. In the 1380s, a minor nobleman named Ludovico lost an argument about fountain placement. His proposal, to build one outside his family's home, was rejected by the town council. They said the location wasn't practical, that it was too steep, too far from the main road, too close to the cemetery, and too obviously a vanity project. So Ludovico did what any powerful, mildly insulted man would do. He built it anyway. Historians still argue whether he funded it with his own coin or rerouted public funds under the guise of essential road moistening. But the result was this defiant little fountain, slightly off-center, slightly excessive, and thoroughly unnecessary. A fringe tidbit? The original design included a self-playing lute mechanism triggered by water pressure. It never worked. The mechanism jammed after 3 hours and, for some reason, released bees. You sit on a nearby ledge and take it in. Despite its origins, the fountain has aged well. Ivy curls around its base like a shrug. Birds perch on its cracked rim. Someone has tucked a daisy into the mouth of a smiling gargoyle that looks like it might burp at any moment. And the townsfolk? They love it. Oh, they mocked it at first. Called it Ludovico's leaky ego. Said the water pressure was only slightly better than a sneeze. But over the centuries, something shifted. The fountain became endearing, a symbol of persistence, of petty victories that, somehow, outlast grander schemes. You hear laughter behind you. A group of school children is reenacting the town's historical vote about fountain placement, complete with hand puppets and exaggerated insults like, "Your spout has no soul." One puppet gets thrown into the basin to general applause. Nearby, a baker uses the fountain's water to cool her fingertips between kneading. An elderly man refills a chipped canteen, humming something that might be Gregorian chant or just very slow opera. Even the mayor stops by. He nods at you, says, "Still here, huh?" Then winks and drops a coin into the basin. A moment later, he adds a second coin. "One for Ludovico," he says. You stay as the sky turns deep blue and the first stars blink awake. The fountain trickles on, a little uneven, a little lopsided, but consistent. In its way, it's perfect. Because what you've learned, across all these towns and stones and centuries is that fountains aren't just about water. They're about who we are when we gather, what we argue over, what we fight to build, and what we secretly love once the dust settles. Even the most absurd designs, lion mouths, goat disasters, scholarly pigeon sprayers, were made with purpose, or pride, or stubbornness, or love. Sometimes all four at once. You take a final sip from the fountain's small wooden cup. The water is cool and just a little metallic, a taste that says, "I came a long way to get here, and now so have you."